The cameras were rolling, the air thick with anticipation, when Donald Trump leveled his latest verbal strike. Sharp, dismissive, dripping with the kind of arrogance America has come to expect. His words weren't just political jabs. They were meant to wound, to humiliate, to paint Jasmine Crockett as unworthy of the platform she had earned. For a moment, it seemed like another episode of the same old script, a powerful man hurling insults, drowning out voices that challenge him. But this time, something was different. The nation watched as Trump, standing tall in his usual defiance, launched into his attack. His rhetoric was fiery, but beneath the spectacle lay a familiar strategy: discredit, demean, and dominate. Audience, both in the room and across the country, could almost predict his cadence. The smirks, the dismissive hand waves, the carefully sharpened sound bites crafted to belittle. But then, the camera cut to Representative Jasmine Crockett. Calm, focused. Her expression was unshaken, her eyes burning with a quiet resolve. She did not flinch. She did not retreat into silence. And in that moment, viewers felt it, the shift in the atmosphere. Crockett wasn't going to play by his rules. She wasn't there to cower or become the latest casualty of Trump's verbal warfare. She was about to turn the spotlight back on him. Social feeds lit up instantly, tweets firing off in real time. Did you see her face? She's about to go off. Hashtags began to swirl, digital whispers spreading across platforms, promising that this would not be just another Trump tirade. Something more explosive was brewing. The tension was cinematic, the kind of silence before a storm that makes audiences lean forward, holding their breath. The villain had made his move, loud and theatrical. The hero now stood at the edge of her reply, measured, calculated, and devastatingly precise. And as Crockett drew in her first words, the nation sensed that they were about to witness a moment that would echo far beyond the room, far beyond the headline, into the very narrative of power and resistance in America. But what she unleashed next left not just Trump, but the entire country reeling. The verbal clash between Donald Trump and Jasmine Crockett was more than a personal spat. It was a confrontation that laid bare the deeper tensions dividing America. Trump's direct attacks weren't merely insults, they were symbolic weapons, sharpened against a new generation of leaders who represented a challenge to his narrative of dominance. Every word carried the weight of decades of political bullying, every smirk a signal that he still believed he could drown out dissent through sheer bravado. But the moment Trump chose to target Crockett, the stakes shifted dramatically. This was no longer just about political theater. It was about identity, resilience, and the right to stand unapologetically in the face of power. For millions watching, Crockett wasn't just another lawmaker under fire. She was a reflection of themselves. Immigrants, women, communities of color, the working class. Audiences saw their struggles mirrored in her calm defiance. Trump had calculated that his attack would leave Crockett rattled, maybe even silenced. But instead, it lit a firestorm. In living rooms across the country, people leaned closer to their screens. Social media feeds exploded with anticipation. Commentators whispered about the possibility of a defining moment, a clash that could ripple into the national narrative. The stakes weren't just political, they were cultural. Crockett's response would decide whether Trump's old tactics still worked, or whether a new kind of leadership could rise above the noise. The question that gripped viewers was simple, yet profound. Could dignity withstand the weight of ridicule? Could quiet strength overpower bombast? And then came the subtle but unmistakable ripple effect. In newsrooms, producers scrambled to shift coverage, sensing a viral storm. In community groups, people began texting links to the live stream, urging friends not to miss what was unfolding. On platforms like Twitter and TikTok, early clips of Trump's sneer and Crockett's poised silence began circulating, setting the stage for her counterattack. The room itself mirrored the tension across the nation. Some smirked in alignment with Trump's bombast, others shifted uneasily, waiting for Crockett to take the floor. The air wasn't just charged, it was combustible, as though history itself was waiting to see if the cycle of insults would continue, unchecked, or if this time something would break. What made the moment even more dramatic was the awareness of what it symbolized. A battle, not just of words, but of eras. Trump, representing the old guard of dominance through spectacle, versus Crockett, embodying a new standard of leadership rooted in persistence, composure, and truth. By the time she prepared to speak, it was clear. This wasn't simply a response to an insult. It was a test. A test of who holds the power to define America's future narrative, the bluster of arrogance, or the resilience of dignity. And as she leaned forward, ready to break her silence, the entire nation braced. What she was about to say would not only define her career, it could redefine the rules of engagement in American politics forever. Because what came next was not just a clapback. It was a reckoning. To understand the weight of this moment, we need to peel back the curtain on Donald Trump's long history of using words as weapons. His attacks on Jasmine Crockett didn't come out of thin air. They were the latest chapter in a decades-long playbook designed to elevate himself by tearing others down. And for Trump, this strategy has always been less about policy and more about performance. From the earliest days of his public life, Trump's brand was built on spectacle. He learned that headlines thrive on conflict, that outrage spreads faster than ideas. When he entered politics, he carried that instinct with him, wielding insults like ammunition. Opponents weren't just challenged, they were nicknamed, caricatured, reduced to punchlines. Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Pocahontas. Each insult was carefully crafted to stick in the public imagination, a constant reminder of his ability to belittle anyone who stood in his way. But beneath the bravado lies a more troubling pattern. Trump has consistently chosen his targets with precision: women, people of color, immigrants, anyone who symbolized a challenge to the old order he claimed to represent. His rhetoric wasn't random, it was deliberate. He understood that by attacking these groups he could stoke division, tap into resentment, and position himself as the champion of those who felt threatened by change. When Jasmine Crockett emerged on the political stage, she represented everything Trump's playbook was designed to undermine. Young, outspoken, principled, and unafraid to speak truth to power, she was the antithesis of the image he wanted to project. And so, it was almost inevitable that she would become a target. Trump's attacks on Crockett echoed his greatest hits: dismissive tones, mocking body language, and attempts to frame her as less than. To him, this was another opportunity to reassert dominance. To the public, however, it revealed a man trapped in the same cycle, recycling old tactics in a world that was beginning to move beyond them. Yet the danger in underestimating Trump lies in forgetting just how effective his methods have been in the past. His words have not only humiliated opponents, but have shifted entire narratives. They've influenced elections, divided households, and fueled some of the most heated debates in modern American history. For years, Trump thrived by exploiting outrage, and this attack on Crockett was no different. It was designed to spark division, to drown her out, to remind the world that he still held the microphone. But here's the twist. The very thing that once made Trump formidable was starting to backfire. Audiences had grown weary of the endless name-calling. The insults, once shocking, now felt tired. And when leveled against someone like Jasmine Crockett, a figure who exuded resilience, the contrast became too stark to ignore. In Crockett's calm silence, viewers saw something Trump could not manufacture: dignity. Where he wielded chaos, she embodied control. Where he shouted, she listened. Where he demeaned, she prepared. And this clash of styles set the stage for an extraordinary reversal of power. Because if Trump's backstory is one of dominance through insult, then the stage was now perfectly set for his greatest vulnerability: being confronted by someone immune to his tactics. Jasmine Crockett was not going to crumble. She was going to rise, and that's why the moment carried so much weight. It wasn't just about Trump versus Crockett. It was about old politics versus new leadership, fear versus courage, noise versus truth. Trump had made his move, using every trick in his book to cast her aside. But what he didn't realize was that the world was ready for something different. They were tired of insults. They were hungry for strength that didn't need to shout. And Jasmine Crockett was about to give them exactly that. But before we can understand her response, We must know who she is, and why her journey made her the one voice Trump could not silence. Before Jasmine Crockett stood under the blinding lights, before the cameras captured her poised defiance against Trump's insults, she had already been tested in ways that forged the steel in her voice. To understand why her response struck such a chord, you have to understand where she came from, and why she was never destined to remain silent in the face of arrogance. Crockett's journey was never about privilege. She wasn't born into a family of billionaires or carried by an empire of inherited wealth. Her story is one of grit, of resilience, of proving that determination can outshine entitlement. Raised in a world that often overlooked women like her, Crockett learned early that if she wanted to be heard, she would have to fight not just harder, but smarter. As a young student, she showed the spark of someone unwilling to accept the limits others placed upon her. Teachers noticed her sharp mind, but more importantly, her refusal to back down when confronted with injustice. Whether it was standing up for classmates who were treated unfairly or challenging authority when rules felt rigged, Crockett was already building the foundation of the leader she would one day become. Her path eventually led her into law, a profession that demands not only intellect, but courage. In courtrooms, she honed the art of argument, learning how to wield truth against entrenched power. She represented the voiceless, the overlooked, the marginalized, cases that didn't always bring prestige or wealth, but always mattered. Every victory, every setback sharpened her resolve. She wasn't chasing applause, she was chasing justice. That pursuit wasn't easy. The legal world, much like politics, was dominated by figures who often underestimated her. She was too young, too outspoken, too different, at least in their eyes. Yet time and again she proved them wrong. She refused to be boxed in by stereotypes, choosing instead to embody a new mold, one where authenticity and strength could coexist with empathy and vision. When she entered politics, it was with the same fire. Jasmine Crockett wasn't stepping onto a stage seeking fame. She was stepping into the arena because she understood the cost of silence. Communities needed voices that weren't polished by privilege, but sharpened by lived experience. She was ready to be that voice. Every attack she endured, every attempt to dismiss her, only added to her arsenal of resilience. For Crockett, insults were not deterrents, they were fuel. And when Trump launched his direct attacks, what the public saw wasn't a woman caught off guard, but a leader who had spent her life preparing for this very kind of moment. Because unlike Trump, Crockett's story wasn't about tearing others down, it was about lifting others up. She carried with her the weight of generations who had been silenced, the hopes of communities often ignored, the determination of those told they would never belong. Her rise was not an accident. It was a testament to what happens when dignity refuses to bend under pressure. And that's what made her response so electric. She wasn't merely answering Trump for herself, she was answering for everyone who had ever been ridiculed, dismissed, or underestimated. Every word she spoke carried the echoes of her journey. The classrooms where she first challenged authority, the courtrooms where she demanded fairness, the communities that entrusted her with their voice. In Crockett's calm poise, viewers saw not just a politician, but a story of struggle, perseverance, and triumph. Her very presence on that stage was already a rebuttal to Trump's worldview. She didn't need to scream or belittle to prove her strength. Her strength was in the steadiness of her gaze, the clarity of her words, the undeniable truth of her existence in a space designed to keep her out. That's why, when she finally responded, it landed with such force. It wasn't just about countering Trump's insult. It was about rewriting the narrative of who gets to hold power in America. Crockett's backstory wasn't background noise. It was the reason her voice carried so far, the reason her clapback felt like a collective victory. For decades, Trump had built his empire on dominance through spectacle. But here was Jasmine Crockett, living proof that true leadership doesn't need theatrics, it needs conviction. And her story gave her that in abundance. So when she opened her mouth to deliver her response, it wasn't just her moment, it was history's. And what she said next would transform that courtroom clash into a cultural turning point. The moment Trump finished his barrage of attacks, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was as if the temperature had dropped, the tension so thick that even seasoned observers felt the weight of what was about to unfold. The insult had been hurled, the gauntlet thrown. Now, all eyes were on Jasmine Crockett. For a brief second, silence hung in the air. Trump leaned back, his expression smug, almost daring her to respond. His supporters in the room chuckled softly, convinced they had witnessed yet another takedown. But Crockett didn't bite. Not immediately. She let the silence stretch, a deliberate pause that unsettled her opponent more than any immediate retort could have. It was a classic Trump tactic. Overwhelm, dominate, leave no room for the other voice. But Crockett's refusal to rush played against him. Each second of her silence built suspense, shifting the attention squarely onto her. The smirk on Trump's face began to look less like confidence and more like nervous anticipation. When Crockett finally spoke, her voice was steady, controlled, every syllable measured. She didn't raise her volume to match his. She didn't mirror his theatrics. Instead, she carved through the noise with clarity. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone calm yet cutting, "you can throw every insult you want, but the truth doesn't bend to your words." Gasps rippled through the room. The escalation had begun. Trump, never one to allow control to slip away, immediately leaned forward, interrupting, tossing in dismissive hand gestures and mocking laughs. He thrived on chaos, on keeping his opponent off balance. But Crockett didn't flinch. She stayed grounded, letting his interruptions highlight his desperation. The more he tried to rattle her, the more composed she appeared. The room began to polarize. On one side, Trump's allies doubled down, clapping at his interruptions, feeding his energy. On the other, Crockett's quiet but commanding presence drew admiration, even from skeptics who hadn't expected her to hold her ground so firmly. The debate was no longer about substance. It had become a duel of styles, a clash of character. Crockett leaned into her strength, turning Trump's aggression into a mirror. "You attack because you're afraid," she said firmly, her eyes locked on him. "Afraid of accountability, afraid of what happens when the truth finally comes to light." The room erupted again, this time not with laughter, but with murmurs, with audible reactions that signaled a shift. Trump's interruptions suddenly seemed less powerful, less commanding. Crockett had found her rhythm, and the momentum was tilting. Trump raised his voice louder, doubling down with another barrage of dismissals. But Crockett didn't retreat. She pushed forward, her words cutting through his noise like steel through smoke. "You think these insults make you strong?" she shot back. "All they show is how weak you are when faced with facts." The escalation had reached its peak. Trump was louder, more chaotic, but Crockett was sharper, more composed. Each exchange was no longer just about policy or politics. It was about who the audience believed embodied real leadership. And as the tension reached its breaking point, the stage was set for the moment that would define the confrontation. Crockett's mic drop counterattack. Because what she delivered next would not just answer Trump's insults, it would dismantle them. The room was already humming with tension, every camera trained on Jasmine Crockett as Trump's insults still hung heavy in the air. His supporters smirked with self-satisfaction, while his detractors braced themselves, waiting to see if Crockett would strike back with the same raw force he had unleashed. But Crockett didn't mirror his chaos. She didn't scream, didn't flail, didn't fight fire with fire. Instead, she leaned into the microphone, her voice calm, deliberate, and cutting. "Mr. Trump," she began, her tone controlled like the calm before a storm, "you think your words can diminish me. But your insults don't reveal my weakness. They reveal your fear." The line landed like a thunderclap. Murmurs erupted from the audience, and even through the television screens, people felt the shift. Trump leaned forward, ready to interject, but Crockett raised her hand slightly, commanding the room without raising her voice. The gesture was small, but the impact was enormous. She had seized control. "Let's be clear," she continued, her eyes never leaving him. "This isn't about me. This is about a pattern. A man who has built his career tearing down women, mocking immigrants, and dismissing anyone who doesn't bow to his ego. You have attacked veterans, mocked the disabled, and lied to the very people you claim to represent. And now, you aim your fire at me. But here's the truth. You don't scare me, and you don't silence me. The words cut deep, not because they were shouted, but because they were spoken with conviction. Every syllable carried the weight of her backstory, every phrase a reflection of battles she had already fought and won. Trump tried to interject again, waving his hands, rolling his eyes, but the crowd was no longer laughing with him. They were leaning toward Crockett. She had turned the tables. "You call me unworthy?" She pressed on, her tone rising just slightly, enough to sharpen the blade. "Mr. Trump, you stand here pretending to be a champion of the people when the truth is your record is littered with corruption, with cover-ups, with failures. You talk about strength, but true strength isn't found in insults. True strength is found in service, in dignity, in the courage to speak truth to power. And that's something you've never had." Gasps rippled across the audience. Phones lit up as clips were already being recorded, shared, captioned. On social media, hashtags began to form in real time. Jasmine Crockett clapback. Jasmine truth over Trump. Strength in silence. And still, she wasn't finished. Crockett leaned forward again, narrowing her focus, as if addressing not just Trump, but the millions watching. "Your attacks on me are nothing new. They're the same recycled tactics you've used against anyone who dares to stand up to you. But I'm not here for myself. I'm here for every young woman told to sit down and be quiet. I'm here for every immigrant family who came here chasing a dream, only to be mocked by leaders like you. I'm here for every American who still believes that justice, not arrogance, should define this nation." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pulling everyone into her orbit. Even Trump, for once, had no immediate retort. His face tightened, his usual bravado cracking as Crockett continued to press. "You want to talk about strength?" she asked, her voice steady as stone. "Strength is a single mother working 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Strength is a veteran carrying the scars of battle, but still believing in this country. Strength is a young black woman standing on this stage, looking the former president of the United States in the eye, and refusing to be diminished by his words." The eruption was immediate. Cheers broke out, applause echoed through the hall, and on social media, the clip was already going viral. But Crockett wasn't done delivering the final blow. She paused, just long enough for the noise to settle, before leaning in with the closing strike. "You attack me because you can't control me. You insult me because you can't silence me. And you fear me because you know that the America I represent, the America of equality, dignity, and truth, will outlast your arrogance. And no matter how loud you shout, history will remember not the insults you hurled, but the justice you tried to deny. Mic drop." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Trump's usual arsenal, mockery, interruption, swagger, had collapsed in the face of Crockett's unflinching calm. He shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable, as the audience erupted into thunderous applause. On Twitter, hashtags trended, globally within minutes. "Crockett just ended Trump," read one viral post. TikTok edits spliced her lines into cinematic montages, complete with music swelling behind her mic drop. Commentators scrambled to rewrite their coverage, pivoting from Trump's attacks to Crockett's stunning rebuttal. And in that moment, the hero versus villain framing crystallized. Crockett stood tall, not just as a politician, but as a symbol of defiance against the old order. Trump, once the master of spectacle, now looked small, his insults rendered powerless against dignity's force. What had begun as a predictable Trump tirade had been transformed into something far greater. A cultural reckoning, a viral phenomenon, a moment destined to be replayed, quoted, and remembered. Because Crockett's counterattack wasn't just about defending herself, it was about reclaiming the narrative for millions who had long waited for someone to stand, unshaken in the face of his bluster. And as the applause roared and the hashtag surged, one truth became clear. This was not the end of the confrontation. It was only the beginning of the aftershocks, because what happened next would take the battle from the stage to the streets, the screens, and the hearts of Americans everywhere. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her final line, "History will remember not the insults you hurled, but the justice you tried to deny," the ripple effect began instantly. The room erupted in applause, but outside those four walls, the explosion was even louder. Within seconds, Twitter feeds ignited. Clips of her takedown were clipped, subtitled, and looped with captions like, "She just ended Trump in under 5 minutes. Crockett, Trump. This is what strength looks like." By the time she left the stage, Crockett clapback was trending across the United States. On Instagram, Reels, and TikTok, creators paired her mic drop moment with everything from cinematic music to boxing slow-motion edits. Memes were flooding Facebook groups, portraying Trump as rattled, wide-eyed, and caught off guard. Cable news scrambled to catch up. CNN rolled a breaking news chyron. Crockett stuns Trump with viral rebuttal. MSNBC aired her counterattack in full, analysts describing it as the most powerful clapback in modern political memory. Even anchors on conservative-leaning networks, visibly reluctant, admitted the exchange had not gone well for Trump. And then came the celebrity endorsements. High-profile figures like Ava DuVernay, Viola Davis, and Mark Ruffalo tweeted their support, praising Crockett for embodying dignity and courage. "That's how you check a bully," one post read, racking up millions of likes. Athletes, musicians, activists, all began to chime in, their voices amplifying hers. Meanwhile, Trump's camp tried to regain control. His spokespeople rushed to the press, insisting he had been misrepresented or taken out of context. But their attempts only fueled the fire. Side-by-side clips showing his insults contrasted with Crockett's poised response made the rounds online, dismantling their spin before it could take hold. For everyday Americans, though, the moment resonated on a much deeper level. In living rooms, dorms, and offices, people replayed the video not once but dozens of times. Young women saw themselves in Crockett's composure, whispering to themselves, "That's how I want to respond when someone underestimates me." Immigrant families gathered around screens, nodding proudly as she invoked their sacrifices as true strength. Veterans, often used as political props, posted videos applauding her for honoring their struggles with authenticity. The backlash against Trump wasn't just political, it was cultural. Hashtags like Quash Truth Over Trump and Strength in Silence gained traction, shifting the narrative from his insults to her dignity. On TikTok, teenagers who had grown up with Trump dominating headlines now stitched Crockett's speech into motivational edits, calling her the future of politics, and perhaps most telling of all, the silence from Trump himself. For hours, the man known for instant counterpunches on Truth Social remained quiet. His advisors reportedly urged restraint, fearing any response would only amplify Crockett's viral dominance. When he finally did post, dismissing her as just another radical Democrat, the response was swift. Memes mocking the desperation of the statement flooded in within minutes. Crockett, meanwhile, leaned into the moment with grace. She didn't gloat or spike the football. Instead, she posted a simple message. "Dignity is strength. Truth is power. Thank you, America." The post was retweeted over 300,000 times in the first 12 hours. On Capitol Hill, colleagues from her party embraced her with newfound admiration. Some admitted privately that while they had expected her to hold her own, they hadn't expected such a viral phenomenon. Committee staffers whispered about how every network was suddenly requesting interviews with her. Even rivals on the other side of the aisle acknowledged, begrudgingly, that she had handled herself better than most. But the most powerful response didn't come from politicians or pundits. It came from ordinary people. A single mother in Detroit uploaded a tearful video thanking Crockett for speaking for women like me who have been told to stay quiet. A young dreamer in Texas tweeted, "She carried all of us with her tonight." Veterans groups issued statements praising her for honoring their service. The resonance was undeniable. Crockett's counterattack had become more than just a clapback. It had become a cultural event, the kind of political moment that transcends the stage and plants itself in the public imagination. For Trump, it marked a rare loss of control over the narrative. For Crockett, it marked a turning point, one where her voice wasn't just heard, but amplified by millions. And as the sun rose the next morning, every major newspaper carried the same image. Jasmine Crockett at the microphone, calm and resolute. Trump in the background scowling. Headlines declared it a seismic moment and the night Trump finally met his match. But even then, the story wasn't over. Because what followed, the way Crockett transformed her clapback into a universal lesson, would elevate the confrontation from a viral sensation to a lasting moral stand. When the dust began to settle, Jasmine Crockett didn't frame her moment as a personal victory. She knew better than to make it about herself. Instead, she transformed the clash into something far larger, something rooted in universal truths America could not ignore. Standing before reporters, she began softly, almost deliberately, letting silence build anticipation. "This was never about me," she said. "This was about the way power tries to silence truth. It was about dignity against arrogance. And it was about the America that ordinary people still believe in." The words struck like lightning. Suddenly, the confrontation wasn't just Trump versus Crockett. It became a symbol of something bigger. The everyday struggle between those who abuse power and those who endure it with resilience. She told stories, not statistics. She spoke of the single mothers who work 2 jobs but are told they're not doing enough. She spoke of immigrants who fight through hardship to build lives in a nation that often questions their right to belong. She spoke of veterans who served bravely, only to be disrespected by leaders who view them as props. And in weaving these stories together, she made her battle with Trump feel like everyone's battle. "Dignity," she declared, "isn't about how loud you shout or how many insults you can hurl. Dignity is the ability to stand tall when someone tries to belittle you. Dignity is looking hatred in the eye and refusing to bow to it. That is the America my parents believed in. That is the America our people deserve." Crowds cheered. Social media amplified her words in bold, stylized quotes across countless posts. Activists called it a rallying cry. Parents showed it to their children as a lesson in courage. Suddenly, her message wasn't just politics. It was character, education for a nation starved of heroes. Meanwhile, the contrast couldn't be sharper. Trump's ranting, red-faced delivery replayed next to Crockett's calm, measured response was a study in character. One was chaos, the other was clarity. One represented ego, the other represented endurance. Viewers didn't need pundits to explain. It was visible in every frame. Crockett leaned into the symbolism. "I'm not here to tear anyone down," she said, voice steady. "I'm here to remind America of what we can rise up to. This is not about party. It's not about me. It's about remembering that truth doesn't need to shout to be powerful. Truth just needs to stand." Commentators called it a modern-day sermon. Clergy across denominations referenced her speech that Sunday, drawing parallels to biblical lessons of humility, overcoming pride. Teachers clipped the video for classrooms. Coaches replayed it in locker rooms as an example of grace under pressure. But, for Crockett, the real power lay in reframing the entire episode not as a scandal but as a parable. "There will always be people who try to reduce you, to make you small," she told her supporters. "But if you know your worth, if you hold on to your truth, their attacks can't define you, they only reveal them." That sentence hit like a drumbeat across the country. Survivors of bullying shared it. Communities of color lifted it as affirmation. Even international outlets picked it up, describing it as a moment where American politics briefly rediscovered its moral voice. In that framing, Trump's attacks shrank into background noise. The headline wasn't his insult. It was her response. And in an era where outrage often drowns out reflection, Crockett had delivered the rarest of things, a confrontation that ended not in chaos, but in clarity. By the end of the week, the moment was no longer about Crockett herself. It had morphed into a touchstone for the country, proof that grace could stand against fury, that dignity could withstand mockery, that truth, though quieter, could echo longer than lies. And with that moral high ground secured, Crockett prepared for the next step, knowing the fight wasn't finished. Because while one battle had been won, the war for America's values was still unfolding. What she said next would determine whether this moment stayed viral or became history. And so, as the cameras dimmed and the storm of reactions continued to swirl across the nation, Jasmine Crockett brought her message home. She returned to the very core of the moment, the clash that millions had now witnessed, and reframed it one final time, not as an argument with Trump, but as a lesson for every American. "You saw what happened," she said with quiet strength. "You saw the insults. You saw the attempt to diminish, but you also saw something else. You saw that dignity doesn't break. You saw that truth stands taller than mockery, and you saw that when one of us is attacked, we can all rise together." Her words left the crowd in silence, the kind that speaks louder than applause. It was no longer just about her. It was about the people watching, the people replaying, the people sharing. Then she leaned into the moment, her voice carrying weight. "If you believe in this America, the America of respect, of truth, of dignity, then I ask you to stand with me. Share this message. Carry it forward. Don't let it stop here." On social media, the clip spread like wildfire, captions urging others to subscribe, follow, and join a growing movement that was bigger than politics. It was about reclaiming the moral core of the nation, and with that, Jasmine Crockett didn't just walk off as a politician who had survived an attack. She walked off as a symbol, proof that in an age of noise and chaos, the quiet power of truth still commands the stage. The choice was left to the viewers. Would they scroll past, or would they join the call?